At my father's funeral, before the priest finished his first sentence, my sister-in-law stood up and announced to the room, "Since everyone's wondering, my husband gets the company. And the 600 million. That's what your dad decided." She didn't lower her voice. She didn't ask permission. She smiled like the outcome was already filed, stamped, and irreversible. People turned to look at me. Some with pity, some with curiosity, most with that quiet relief people feel when they're not the one being erased in public. My husband stiffened beside me. He had no script for this moment. None of us were supposed to speak yet, but she had always believed rules paused when she entered a room. Then my father laughed. It came from the coffin. Not loud, not dramatic. A short, amused chuckle like he just watched someone make a very expensive mistake. The room locked up. The priest froze. A woman in the back gasped. My sister-in-law's smile stayed in place, but her eyes flicked toward the coffin, searching for reassurance that didn't come. I didn't move. I didn't explain. I didn't look surprised, because that sound wasn't confusion. It wasn't some final act of cruelty. It was recognition. My father had always laughed like that when someone spoke with confidence about things they didn't own, decisions they didn't make, power they didn't understand. My sister-in-law thought she'd just claimed the future out loud. What she didn't know, what none of them knew, was that my father had planned this moment down to the timing of her voice. She thought the funeral was where she won. It was where she exposed herself. After the laugh, no one spoke, not because they were respectful, but because they were recalculating. You could feel it happening. Eyes shifting. Allegiances quietly checking their footing. My sister-in-law sat back down like nothing had happened, crossing her legs, chin lifted. She wanted control back, wanted the room to forget that sound. So she did what she always did when something didn't go her way. She dismissed it. "Probably just the casket settling," she said lightly. "These old halls echo." A few people nodded, grateful for permission to believe something normal. Cowardice loves explanations. I stayed silent. Silence had always made her uncomfortable. She mistook it for weakness because she'd never learned the difference between being quiet and being powerless. My father had. Growing up, my brother learned how to speak, how to charm, how to fill rooms with confidence he hadn't earned yet. I learned how to listen, how to notice what people skipped over, how to sit through meetings no one thought mattered and remember everything said after everyone else stopped paying attention. That difference mattered now, because while my sister-in-law scanned the room, measuring who still believed her version of events, she didn't notice the details tightening around her. The lawyer near the aisle hadn't nodded. The CFO hadn't looked relieved. 2 board members weren't whispering, they were reading. My husband leaned toward me, barely moving his lips. "Did you know about this?" "No," I said quietly. And that was true. But I knew my father, and I knew he never laughed unless the outcome was already decided. The room thought the tension came from grief. It didn't. It came from the moment right before a story breaks, when everyone realizes they've been standing on assumptions and the ground is about to move. They always thought I was peripheral. At family events, I was the one asked to take photos, to check on catering, to make sure the schedules printed correctly. In meetings, I sat slightly back from the table, laptop open, pen moving, rarely interrupting. My sister-in-law once introduced me to a client as the organized one, like it was a personality quirk, not a skill. I never corrected her, because being underestimated is only a disadvantage if you believe attention equals power. I learned early that it doesn't. Control comes from access, from repetition, from being present when decisions are made and forgotten by everyone else. While my brother was groomed for visibility, I was trusted with continuity. I handled contracts when executives rotated out. I knew which suppliers never missed deadlines and which ones survived only because no one checked closely. I remembered which board members hated risk and which ones pretended they didn't. Over time, people stopped explaining things to me because they assumed I already knew. They were right. None of that was dramatic. That's why no one noticed it happening. My sister-in-law believed inheritance worked like applause. The loudest person at the podium wins. She never saw the quiet infrastructure beneath her confidence. She never asked who maintained it, who audited it, who made sure it didn't collapse under its own weight. At the funeral, she smiled at condolences like they were congratulations. She didn't look at me once. She didn't need to. From her perspective, the story was already written. But stories built on noise don't survive contact with records. And my father didn't raise me to make speeches. He raised me to keep ledgers. That's why, as the service resumed and the priest cleared his throat, I felt calm. Not because I was brave, but because I knew exactly how much of her certainty was borrowed, and I knew when it would be called in. After the service ended, people didn't rush out. They lingered in clusters, speaking softly, pretending the tension wasn't the real reason they stayed. My sister-in-law moved through them like a victor, accepting condolences that sounded suspiciously like congratulations. She stopped near the front, where a few board members stood. I watched her posture change, shoulders back, voice firmer. She was already rehearsing authority she hadn't been given of. "You'll hear from us next week," she said, smiling. "We'll be reviewing leadership roles. There are efficiencies to address." Efficiencies. The word people use when they plan to remove others without saying it. One of the senior managers nodded, uneasy. Another glanced past her, briefly at me. She noticed and followed his gaze. Her eyes narrowed. "Oh, don't worry," she said, waving a hand in my direction. "She won't be involved. Dad always kept her on the operational side. Useful, but not strategic." She said it kindly. That was the sharpest part. I didn't respond. I didn't need to. I'd heard worse, usually said with less confidence. What she didn't realize was that the operational side she dismissed was where every fragile promise she'd just made either survived or died. Strategy sounds impressive. Operations decide what's real. Behind her, the company's outside counsel closed his folder instead of opening it. The CFO checked his watch, then his phone, then put it away without answering anything. Small tells. Quiet ones. My sister-in-law missed all of it. She was too busy performing certainty. As she turned away satisfied, she leaned toward my brother and said something that made him laugh. Relief laughter. The kind that comes from believing you've escaped scrutiny. I watched them walk out together, convinced the hard part was over. They thought the funeral was the last uncomfortable moment. They didn't know the real one hadn't happened yet, and that it wouldn't be loud at all. The meeting happened 3 days later, not because it was urgent, but because my sister-in-law wanted time to enjoy the illusion. She sent the invite herself. Executive conference room. Mandatory attendance. Subject line: post-transition alignment. She sat at the head of the table like it had always belonged to her. My brother was beside her, nodding along, smiling at people he barely recognized. A few executives joined remotely. Cameras on. Faces neutral. The kind of neutrality that comes from knowing more than you're saying. She opened with confidence. Thanked everyone for their patience. Spoke about legacy. About moving forward. About honoring my father by streamlining leadership. Every sentence assumed agreement. She never once asked for it. Then she slid a folder across the table toward me. "We won't be needing your role anymore," she said calmly. "Operations will be absorbed. HR will follow up." Just like that. Clean. Public. A few people shifted. No one interrupted. I picked up the folder, didn't open it. Looked at her, then passed her to the CFO. He didn't look back. He looked down. "I see," I said. My voice didn't change. "Before HR does anything, can we clarify one thing?" She smiled, indulgent. "Of course." I reached into my bag and placed a thin binder on the table. No logo, no title, just tabs. "This," I said, tapping it once, "is the operational authority register my father had me maintain for the last 7 years. It outlines who can terminate whom, under what conditions, and with whose approval." The room went quiet, not shocked quiet, recognizing quiet. I opened the binder, and according to this, I continued, "You can't fire me." I looked up. "But I can stop you from firing anyone." She laughed first, a short, dismissive sound like she was humoring a child who'd learned a new word. "That's not how this works," she said. "Legal already reviewed everything." "No," I replied. "Legal reviewed what you sent them." I slid the binder toward the center of the table and rotated it so everyone could see the tabs. They weren't labeled with names. They were labeled with functions. Authority, continuity, risk containment. My sister-in-law stopped smiling. "These documents don't live in HR," I continued. "They never have. They sit outside normal reporting because they're activated only when ownership and control diverge." Someone on the video call leaned closer to their camera. I flipped to a marked page. 3 years ago, when my father restructured voting power, he separated inheritance from execution. Shares transfer automatically. Authority doesn't. I didn't look at her when I said it. I looked at the room. Authority requires continuity sign-off. That sign-off comes from operations, finance, and external counsel. All three. The CFO finally raised his head. The outside lawyer cleared his throat but didn't speak. My sister-in-law pushed her chair back slightly. "You're saying I don't run my husband's company?" "I'm saying," I corrected, "that owning something and controlling it are different skills." My father was very clear about that. My brother frowned. "This is ridiculous." "It's documented," I said, "and it's already been acknowledged." I tapped the last page. Signatures. Dates. Not dramatic, just final. For the last 72 hours, I added, "Any unilateral executive action you attempted would have required countersignature." She stared at the binder like it had betrayed her. "The termination you just announced?" I said calmly. "It never existed." Silence spread again, but this time it wasn't confusion. It was comprehension. She tried to recover by changing tactics. "This feels personal," she said, folding her hands. "We're supposed to be family." Family. The word people reach for when the math stops favoring them. I didn't respond to her. I turned to the room. "For clarity," I said, "this isn't a power grab. It's a safeguard. That distinction matters." I flipped another tab. My father anticipated a transition where ownership moved faster than competence. So he installed a delay mechanism. I paused. Let that land. Not to block anyone permanently. To observe. The lawyer finally spoke. "The mechanism is valid." My sister-in-law's head snapped toward him. "You said everything was clean." "It is," he replied carefully. "Clean doesn't mean unlimited." I continued. "For 6 months, executive authority is conditional. Decisions above a certain threshold trigger review. Staffing changes. Asset movement. Contract renegotiations." I looked at my brother then, especially terminations. My brother opened his mouth, then closed it. He wasn't used to rooms that didn't bend toward him. "So what?" my sister-in-law said sharply. "You babysit us?" "No," I said. "I document you." It was the moment her confidence finally cracked. Documentation doesn't argue. It waits. "The review period ends automatically," I added, "unless certain risk indicators appear." "What indicators?" she demanded. I slid one page forward. "Hostile restructuring, retaliatory firings, governance violations." I met her eyes. "All of which you've already triggered." The CFO exhaled slowly. Someone on the call muted themselves. I closed the binder. "This meeting," I said, "is now on record." She looked around, searching for support. What she found instead was distance. Because everyone in that room understood the same thing at once. The company wasn't slipping from her hands. It had never been in them. The consequences didn't arrive dramatically. They arrived procedurally. Within an hour, calendars began to change. Meetings were reclassified. Excess levels adjusted. The kind of quiet shifts that never make noise, but permanently change who can move where. My sister-in-law noticed when her assistant stopped responding. Then when her badge failed at a side entrance she'd used for years. Small frictions. Plausible deniability built into every one of them. "This is absurd," she said, standing. "We're done here." "No," the lawyer said gently. "I." She turned to my brother, waiting for him to say something decisive. He didn't. He was reading the room now, realizing it wasn't aligned with him anymore. I addressed the table. "Effective immediately, the review committee is active. That means all executive actions are paused pending validation." "Who's on the committee?" she snapped. I didn't answer. The CFO did. Operations. Finance. External counsel. "And who chairs it?" she pressed. I closed my notebook. "I do." That landed differently than anything else I'd said. Not because of ego, because it explained everything that had already happened. The lawyer gathered his papers. "We'll circulate minutes. This session is adjourned. No vote. No debate. Just acknowledgement." As people stood, phones buzzed. Messages came in faster now. Clarifications. Questions. Confirmations. The machinery responding to a correction. My sister-in-law stayed seated, staring at the table as if it might contradict us. It didn't. My brother finally spoke. Dad wouldn't have wanted this. I looked at him. He designed it. I stood, pushed in my chair, and picked up the binder. This isn't punishment, I said. It's containment. As I left the room, I heard her say my name for the first time that day. Not dismissively, carefully. Too late. Containment works quietly, but its effects are loud to the person being contained. By the end of the week, my sister-in-law had stopped calling meetings and started sending emails. Long ones. Carefully worded. Copied to everyone. She framed everything as concern, about morale, about continuity, about transparency. No one replied the way she expected, because transparency, once enforced, has a way of exposing tone. HR requested documentation she didn't have. Finance delayed approvals she assumed were automatic. Legal asked questions she couldn't answer without admitting she'd skipped steps. Each reply tightened the perimeter another inch. My brother tried privately first. He called late, voice lowered, angry in that restrained way he used when he wanted to sound reasonable. "You're enjoying this," he said. "No," I replied. "I'm maintaining it." He accused me of betrayal, of ambition, of rewriting history. I let him finish. "When Dad was alive," I said, "you thought leadership meant being seen. He knew it meant being trusted." Silence followed, not reflection. Withdrawal. The formal notice arrived the next morning. Not termination, review. 6 months. Restricted authority. Mandatory oversight. Exactly as outlined. My sister-in-law forwarded it back to me with a single line. "This isn't over." I didn't respond, because the threat only works when someone is still playing offense. She wasn't. She was reacting now, trying to regain ground that no longer existed. At the end of the week, the board ratified the process unanimously. No speech. No confrontation. Just a record. And records, once entered, don't forget. I archived the file, labeled it by date, and moved on to the next item on my list. Power doesn't announce itself when it wins. It just keeps going. 6 months later, the review period expired exactly the way my father said it would, without drama, without ceremony, without anyone pretending it was a surprise. My sister-in-law didn't make it to the end. She resigned 2 weeks before the final evaluation, citing personal reasons. The board accepted it in a single paragraph. No farewell email. No speech about contributions. Just a vacancy quietly filled by someone who understood process more than posture. My brother stayed. Technically, his title remained, but the confidence never came back. Authority, once interrupted, doesn't always return to its original shape. He stopped interrupting meetings. Started asking for confirmation. Learned too late that trust is harder to inherit than assets. The company stabilized. Numbers normalized. Vendors relaxed. People stopped whispering. On the day the final report was filed, I visited my father's grave alone. No flowers. No audience. Just the marker and the quiet he'd always preferred. "You timed it well," I said, feeling slightly ridiculous for speaking out loud. He would have appreciated that. I didn't win the company. I didn't need to. I kept it intact. That was the assignment. Before I left, my phone buzzed once. A blocked number. No message. I deleted the notification and put the phone away. That night, I slept through until morning. No alerts. No calls. No contingency plans running in my head. People think revenge is loud, that it ends with shouting or applause. They're wrong. Sometimes it ends with structure holding, chaos removed, and the right person no longer needing to explain anything. My father laughed at his funeral because he knew this part would be quiet. And he was right.